Well, welcome to question 117 of the Secunda Secundae. The virtue today is liberality. Now, this one's a bit longer than a lot of the other ones we've been previously looking at. Previously, we've been looking at questions that have had maybe 2 or 3 articles. This one's had 6 articles, so this one's a bit longer than the other videos, and I am Dr. Thibault. The liberality as a virtue is defined as a spirit of generosity in the proper use of money or possessions and for the worthy use of them. Um, Liberality is not in the common parlance of today. Today we have perhaps liberal versus conservative. There's an element of politics involved in this. This term of liberality has nothing to do with the current political climate of liberals and conservatives, either the European model or the American model. Liberality, in this sense, is a moral virtue, um, which applies to the individual rather than to a political ideology. Liberality, according to the Baltimore Catechism, it properly disposes us to rightly use worldly goods. Another term for liberality, one that Thomas doesn't really use, is generosity. Some translations of the Summa use the word generosity, but when you look to the Latin, they're using various other terms. Beneficence might be the most closest term to generosity, but generosity and liberality are very closely related if you're trying to put your head around what liberality means in this moral sense. Um, Liberality is a generous use of the material goods of the world. Liberality consists in being ready and willing for the love of God to give pecuniary assistance, which means financial assistance, to those who are in need. And this comes from a really conservative book on Catechism Explained. By liberality, we obtain forgiveness of our sins, an eternal reward, and temporal blessings, besides a speedy answer to prayer and the friendship of our fellow men. um, if we are in a state of grace and we are doing meritorious things, then God blesses us meritoriously in a sense, versus if we are in mortal sin where we can have no merit, none of our prayer, none of our good works uh, attain any form of merit. So by doing this, we are more living in union, in that union of charity with God. Therefore, our work, because God is living and working through us, produces more meritorious results. I think that's the general principle behind this last line from the Catechism Explained. Acting with liberality, and this is taken right from the Summa, uh, is even a poor person can be liberal, for liberality does not depend on giving largely, but upon giving with a good will. Uh, it is the disposition of the giver that makes the gift great or small. The other line is the liberal person is like God, for by showing mercy we resemble our Heavenly Father. It makes me think of the great line from Blessed Mother Teresa, Saint Mother Teresa, do small things with great love. That's really the heart of this. It's the widow's mite. The widow who puts a pence in can give more than a wealthy person who gives very little. Because this virtue isn't on a particular number. It's not like over five gifts over $500 that virtue are a greater virtue. It depends on the what is in the person's heart. It really comes down to the internal motivation and internal intentions of the person. Uh, Now, it can't just be this internal sense of goodwill isn't enough for it to be liberality. Liberality isn't just well wishing in a positive thought, positive minded way. Liberality has to be in a material way as well. So, can we make a gift of liberality? Yes. we should have a gift that pours out of our soul. We should have a soul filled with good and with givingness. But then, should we be generous not just with our soul and with our well wishing? Yes, we should give of our time. We should give of our energy, but we should also give of the things we have in this world for good as well. So St. Thomas points out in his answer, he said, this is really about giving all, both what is internal and external to us. Anything that we can claim as our own, we should be willing to give and place in the proper ordering. Uh, is it against nature? If we are for us to be inclined to be liberal, and this was one of the critiques, the objections to St. Thomas was this idea that, well, if we are not naturally inclined to be liberal, then we are contrary to our own nature. Therefore, liberality is not a virtue. But what he's saying, what he points out is, well, we should seek first goodness for ourselves in terms of our soul. We can be somewhat possessive and jealous about the goodness of our soul for seeking the ultimate goodness. We should be a little bit vicious when it comes to our attempts to get to heaven. Right? Heaven, our spiritual well-being, we should be very selfish about in some sense. We should be aiming for it. We shouldn't give away our own soul in order to make somebody else happy. The preservation of our soul is the most important thing. However, when it comes to material wealth, well, that's a whole different thing. Uh, he says that rich people are rich because God has given them that abundant blessing, and He has given it to them as a test of their character to make sure that they can develop the virtue of stewardship and liberality. So if a person has a greater deal of wealth for whatever reason, this is an opportunity to develop this virtue of liberality. If you have a lot of wealth and you don't exercise this virtue, then it's wasted. Because none of this you can take with you. You can't take any of the material with you after death. But if you have developed the virtue of liberality in this life, you take your virtues with you. So this is a wonderful opportunity. Not everyone is given the same challenges in life to develop all the same virtues in the exact same way, but affluent people are particularly given this opportunity to develop these virtues. But it doesn't let everybody else off the hook, as stated in the previous slide. Even poor people have to practice liberality. All of us have to practice liberality, even the widow who only has 2 pence. um, but the other extreme from an objection is it can't liberality couldn't be a virtue because if we give everything away, then we have nothing to live off of ourselves. Well, St. Thomas again, of course, this is a moral virtue. Because it's a moral virtue, we're dealing with a golden mean. If we are deficient in liberality, we have covetousness. And if we have an excess in liberality, we have prodigalness. Uh, so the golden mean is the proper way to have liberality. So it is important not to lose sight of yourself, of himself, and those who belong to him. So if a parent gives away what they need to survive, uh, they have uh, they have broken the golden mean and they have gone into probably prodigalness in excess of giving. Dorothy Day's daughter, when she grew up, she kind of criticized Dorothy Day for having this excess of liberality. Of the daughter wanted certain things, and Dorothy Day gave money away to homeless people and people who were worse off than her and her family. You could make the claim that uh, maybe she went too far in taking care of herself and those who belong to her, namely her daughter. Um, the gray area of how far is too far. But the aim is that golden mean in the middle. Liberality is a virtue, as I've said multiple times now. It's a moral virtue. Uh, a li- by being a moral virtue, you're not in excess or deficiency. So you don't give away uh, that which you need to survive, right? If you, and this is, people often point this out. They say, well, if you take and give all you have to the poor to follow Jesus, come give all you have to the poor and come follow me. Um, well, now you're the beggar. You've become a beggar yourself, and now you're a burden on society. Now people have to give something to you. Um, that's the constant critique of that. The most important thing would be to give everything you have and follow Jesus. But if we do, then if we all did that, then won't we all just have nothing, or aren't we just trading with one another at that point? But St. Thomas in this Golden Mean is saying we're not giving away what we need to survive. We're giving away what we otherwise don't need to survive. This is from our excess. This is from our abundance that we give away and still be perfectly within the golden mean. Um, and St. Ambrose points out, says, our Lord does not wish a man to pour out all of his riches at once. Right? If you're going to live for another 30 or 40 years, you need to have enough to survive off of yourself. And then, every year you can decide how much you need to give away in order to give the most away as you possibly can out of liberality, while still having enough to survive yourself until your death, which you don't always know when your death is going to be. So sometimes there's something left over at the end, even if you are intending to be liberal. Uh, Now there is still that line of the gospel: "Give all you have to the poor and come follow me." Well, is Jesus a liar for saying that? Is Jesus living in the realm of excess? Um, and St. Thomas says no. There's still room for that within the state of perfection. But we won't get into that until questions 184 and the questions 186. Um, but there is room from trying to be perfect. Just give it all away. Have nothing. Leave nothing of this world. Someone like a Saint Francis type. Uh, People who take a religious vow of some kind. Just empty it all. There's room for that. But Saint Thomas isn't calling everyone to that. He's calling, if you have a special virtue in order to that, a special grace given to you by God to do that, then you need to respond to your vocation. The average vocation for the average person is not a complete abandonment of uh, all of the business of the world. Um, it's just to live in a virtuous state of giving, which is where most of us probably are called. Um, um, and he points to a very practical part of this. As with all the virtues, if you direct liberality to the proper end, you aim at in the right means, uh, liberality leads to happiness. Giving away your possessions should give you pleasure if it's done in the proper order, which is an interesting point. What's brought up as well in the second article is that if a person is being generous with something they've stolen, maybe Robin Hood, right? Robin Hood type, is not liberal. If a person is a criminal, a mobster who has gotten their wealth from selling drugs and weapons and murdering people, and then they give generously, then it's not liberal because there's no merit in ill-gotten gains. It's only when a person has honestly earned the money or has inherited the money that there's any merit in properly giving the money away. Um, and if a person gives intemperately or they fund the vices of others, then it's not liberal either. It's prodigal, it's an excess. So, if, for example, you decide you're going to be very generous uh, and give money to a homeless person who's near your house who's panhandling, but you know the person is an alcoholic or a drug addict. Um, if you every day go and give them $20, um, and you know what you're doing, you give them the $20, you come back later in the day and they're drunk or they're high. Um, you are simply funding another person's vices. It is an intemperate way of giving. There is no virtue in being in liberality in funding another person's destruction of their body and soul. That would be prodigal, even though it's not spent on yourself. Uh, if you say, well, I know this person's an alcoholic or a drug addict, so I'm going to buy them food every day, well, that's fine, right? That would be a very liberal thing to do, would be to provide somebody with food. But if you give cash, you might be funding the vice of others. And if you don't know, then you're not necessarily guilty of it. But if you have a good suspicion, or you do know, or you should know that you're funding the vice of another, then there's no virtue in that. I guess the same thing would be if you had a family member who was addicted to gambling and you gave them money, knowing that they were going to gamble it, not spend it on their family or on rent. You don't get any virtue points for funding immorality. Uh, and this idea that really all the virtues are interconnected. So you can't be virtuous in liberality and still being non-virtuous if you're a liar and a thief and intemperate in every other way. It's an integral approach to the good. Uh, the question is liberality material versus spiritual? And this question comes up a lot within uh, chapter 117 of the Summa, um, because a lot of people would like to say this is really, because we're dealing with virtue, it's really just a spiritual sense of being open. It's spiritual. You don't have to actually give money. You don't have to actually physically do anything. It's about the spirit of it. And what St. Thomas keeps pointing out in this is that it's not. It's not just, you do have to have the spirit of it, but it has to be in act, a gift. Um, Liberality has two parts, as he points out. There's an open-handedness, this idea of abundance, maybe generosity, largitas, this idea of abundance, and also free from material attachment, this liberat, which is where the term liberality gets its name, which is freedom. It's freedom in not being owned by any material possession. Uh, but it actually requires you to part with things, as he points out. You can't be free from it and not part with it. You can't say, I'm so detached from the material world, and then still have the five Ferraris in the driveway. Well, if you have the five Ferraris, maybe you're not as detached as you think you are. It's very easy for that kind of millionaire limousine liberal under the political term. It's easy to be in spirit claiming to be very generous. It is another thing to actually be generous with material beings. You have to actually part from material goods in order to embody that liberality. And again, just kind of straightforward and simple, but there has to be an interior movement of the soul, an interior movement of virtue that makes us want to intend to give something away, to intend to have the proper ordering of goods. Uh, the exterior thing, the object, is the money itself. And the term money, in this sense, he keeps saying money, but it's this Vicinia, or the pecora, is the term. So we're using very ancient language. Before money, people traded sheep. So pecora is a flock of some kind of flock of sheep. So they're talking about things that could be, and Aristotle points this out in Ethics chapter 4. Money is anything which can be exchanged for currency. So anything physical that you can sell and turn it into coin, turn it into money, is money. So land is money, house is money, car is money. Anything is money if you could trade it and it could become currency. So the exterior thing, the pecora, the money, has to be part of it. And this idea is that action follows being. So if you have an inner disposition of liberality, your actions will follow what you are. If you are a liberal person, if you have liberality, if you are a generous person, that will follow with the object of your passion, which would be the letting go of money, right? In the broadest sense of the term, money. Um, Liberality depends on the heart of the giver, not the quantity given, which I think is a wonderful line from the Summa. It really is an interior thing. Money itself can't be virtue. It's the disposition within the heart that's virtue. But as I keep pointing out, the interiority of the heart has to be paired with external acts. It has to be paired with the object. It can't just be a self-proclaimed inner disposition. Other virtues also claim the proper use of money. For example, justice. And justice has an approach to money in two ways. One way is that it deals with equity. What is an equitable distribution of wealth, a distributive theory of justice. Um, and what are the external things due to another? This is the first understanding of justice in terms of money. Um, this we talk about with what is the just wage for workers? All right, that is this first understanding of money in terms of justice. Magnificence is another one that deals with, which is we will get to soon, which is the use of money to do great things. The use of money to build an orphanage, a cathedral, something that gives glory to God. So the use of money to do something noble, wonderful, and glorious is another virtue which is connected with money. But the one that, again, that we're doing now is liberality, which still falls under the section of the Summa of justice. We are under the theory of justice within the Summa right now. And it's to make good use of money. It's to keep it in preparation in order to use it for its best purposes. Uh, it's both we'll get to that, but it's both spending and saving, and spending it on yourself and spending it on others. It's the proper ordering of money so that it is best used. Um, and this is different than in terms of the first understanding of justice, whereby it's something that you owe to somebody. There's a debt there. This is not a debt. This is just after everybody has equity in the system, you can still do more. You can still do even above what is owed to somebody, even after the debts are made. Again, this golden mean has this proper balance. What is the proper amount you spend on yourself? What is the proper amount you spend on others? It's more virtuous to spend on others than yourself, but you have to spend something on yourself. Then the proper balance of saving and spending. If it's all spending on yourself and others, and there's nothing saved, well, then happens when there's the famine, and now you can't take care of yourself or others. So it is the proper balance of that. Saint Charles Borromeo, a bishop in Milan, his family had a lot of money, but then during the plague, he was able to do a lot financially, support the poor. Well, the poor existed even before the plague. He could have spent all of his money before the plague, but if he had, and when the plague occurred, there would have been no money at all to give, and then people really would have suffered. Um, did he foresee the plague? No, he didn't foresee it, but you could foresee that you have to save in case something were to happen. And sometimes nothing happens, but it's still good to have that prudence, right? This foresight ahead of us of what could happen and how to properly balance the risk. Somebody who has liberality has a very good sense of balance and spending and saving. Liberality is about giving money away. It's using money. You have to part from the money. Further, we have to put it. The further we put it away, the greater he said virtus, which is the term from male or power, force. Uh, so the further we put the money away from us, the greater the virtue is. If we give it to ourselves, very little virtue in it. If we give it to our families or our friends, in some sense that's charity, in some sense because it's loving, but it's not powerful. To give it to a complete stranger, to give it to people from another land, another culture, give it to starving people in Pakistan is more virtuous than giving it to your neighbor who lives next door to you. It has more of a sense that it has a deeper sense of justice. Um, what's brought up a bit too is this idea of liberality and nurture, and he puts forward this idea that some things are easier for some people versus others depending on where they have come from in life. So a person who inherits, who's an heir, who inherits a lot of money, might find it very easy to spend. They might have no problem spending. Um, their difficulty might be spending it wisely, right? They might be using it to fund fights, like the story of the prodigal son. Uh, but if you spend without spending it wisely, then it's not virtuous; it's just prodigal. If a person is raised without money and they have saved money their entire lives, they might spend the money very wisely, not prodigally. But what they might have a problem with is parting from the money at all. They might not want to ever part from it, which could be the opposite, which would be covetousness. So the proper order, so based on when you were brought up, if you were brought up very poor, you might struggle with covetousness. If you're raised very affluently, you might struggle with being prodigal, but the proper thing would be the right balance of the two. Uh, justice and liberality. Uh, justice has to do with fellowship of humankind, is what St. Ambrose says. So, again, back to these two ideas of justice. Uh, fellowship has two parts. Justice in the first part, which is giving to people what they are owed, paying back any debts to society. And then there's liberality, which has beneficence, which is kind of generosity, or kind-heartedness, which is the same term that he uses for beneficence and kind-heartedness. Um, so in one sense, you have kind of strict justice of what you owe, you give. And then on the other hand, a fellowship, affability, civil affability is mercy, right? You have justice and mercy in some sense, and they go hand in hand because justice, in the first stricter sense of the term justice, of giving people what they are owed by debt, you don't have a full picture. The full picture would be both giving people specifically what they owe, and then going a bit above that and beyond that with liberality. Um, He points out that liberality is a principal virtue of justice. It's one of the virtues which creates justice. Without liberality, then it wouldn't truly be just. Justice wouldn't truly be just without liberality. Um, and it's about not what others are owed, right? The first sense of justice, you're giving people what they are owed. This isn't really about what other people are owed. It's not an external thing, strictly speaking. It's an internal thing. Um, by being liberal, having liberality, it's what you owe to yourself. The other people are already getting what they are owed by the first definition of justice. In this sense of liberality, this is you letting go. It is like liberality being liberty. It's freedom from material possessions, free from the chains of materiality, like Ebenezer Scrooge carrying around Jacob Marley carrying around the chains of all of their money. It's letting it go. It's cutting the chains of materialism. It's not that others are owed it. It's that you want to let go of it. You want to let go of it. It's coming from this inner disposition up within your own heart, not what other people are necessarily owed. And it's coming from what you own, and you have a right to. You could use it for whatever you want, technically speaking, legally speaking. But what will give you the greatest amount of happiness and virtue would be to use it in a way that is liberating and free, which leads you to greater happiness. And what he points out is this is not charity or friendship, this use, but it's just detachment. Detachment to use the material goods of the world and dedicate it to a useful end. You're doing it simply for freedom, not from charity itself. Now he points out in the last question, Article 6, liberality and popularity is that if a person is very liberal, has a lot of liberality, clearly they would have a lot of people around them. It'd be very popular, right? If your habitus is giving away money, right? Money in the bigger sense. If your thing is that you're giving away a lot of money, well, you have a lot of people who like you. You know, they'll name buildings after you. They'll put statues up after you. They'll create scholarships named after you. There'll be a lot of things that people will be very happy to be around a person who's very generous with giving away their money. And especially when they're not doing it to give it to their friends, but they're giving it to do the most good, the proper use of money. Uh, might make one popular, but it doesn't mean it's the greatest virtue. The greatest virtue, as St. Thomas points out, is related to charity rather than liberality. Um, Charity is giving it out of love. This isn't giving it out of love. This could be giving it to a complete stranger, whoever needs it. But this is about the proper ordering of material goods. It's about the material goods themselves versus charity, which is about the love of neighbor, love of God. This isn't really about the love of neighbor. It's just a detachment from material things so that the greatest good can happen in the world because you're detached from those material things. Now, this really, this virtue in itself isn't perfect, right? It's just detachment and allowing yourself to be free. It does, but it doesn't exist in a bubble, right? It's interconnected with charity. It's interconnected with temperance uh, and all the other virtues, right? When they all are working together, then it's actually really, really good. In conclusion, the 6 points to point out, the highlights of all 6 articles. Liberality is a virtue of proper ordering of money, right? The flocks of sheep. Liberality leads to freedom and happiness since it frees a person from disordered attachments. So liberality leads to liberty. Liberality comes from the heart, but it results in the act. Right. It has to start with the heart, but it can't end in the heart. It has to end in acts of the object in the material world. Uh, Liberality is challenged by our upbringing. If we were born affluent, uh, prodigalness might be too easy. If we were born poor, covetousness might become too easy, or depending on how you were brought up. But the proper balance, which we all strive for, is liberality. Um, Whether you're rich or poor, you can express liberality. Uh, and liberality is the principal virtue of justice, not as just fulfilling a debt under the strict sense of the definition of justice, but properly balancing the goods of humanity, properly balancing good justice in terms of debt and mercy. And liberality does not live alone, but in communion with the other virtues. So liberality is best used when shared with others. Our next topic is covetousness and then prodigal. Covetousness is another long one with 8 articles to it. So see you next time when we cover question 118.